Welcome to Risk Manager and Qradar. What I'm going to show you here is firewall configuration. So if we go in the Admin tab under Risk Manager plugins, there's a configuration source that allows you to add firewall sources if it hasn't auto-detected them. Once it has them, however, clicking on the Risk tab, we kind of get an overview. What are all the firewall devices and switches and so forth in our environment? So in my lab environment, we notice we have one main system and it has a few virtual firewalls under it. So it's denoted under context. And you can see that they're all the same device IP. So it's one physical device, but it has multiple firewall configurations under it. This is a Cisco, as we can see from the vendor side as well. And then we have some other firewalls under here. So at this point, we can drill into any one of these particular firewalls, and we can start seeing things about it. But one other thing I did want to point out here, if we notice over on the log source side, we'll notice that two of these devices actually have log sources pointed at it. So if they were already configured for risk, sending their syslog events into Risk Manager, Qradar automatically detects that and brings that up. That's going to be an important point for a minute when we talk about understanding your firewall rules. So right here, these two checkpoint under log sources, we can see have syslogs pointed to Qradar. So we automatically kind of stitch that information together from this view, if you will. So what we're going to do now is we're actually going to drill into one of these devices. And simply enough, by double clicking onto the device will bring us inside of the device itself. And now it opens up into a summary of the device. And we can see its different interfaces, what type of device it is, its current ACLs, its rules, and all that good information that we've pulled into it. We can see its rule order. What are the different type of rules that are on any particular firewall device as well. But again, what we wanted to get into here very briefly is show you the power of configuration management. So again, Qradar does not edit or change firewall configurations, but it does help you keep compliancy on them. Great help in any environment where you're trying to validate what changes are made on firewalls. And a great use case is if you're switching firewalls out. Maybe you're switching from Cisco to Palo Alto or vice versa. So first of all, it'll show you and normalize these events. So if you notice as we look at this, this is normalized. So this look and feel will show up the same regardless if I'm looking at a Cisco or Palo Alto or Barracuda or whatever, because the rules are in a normalized state, making very human readable. The other thing to note here is that if you notice in the status side, because rules are done in order, right? So order one, it has to process every rule for every packet walking through a particular device. And if we notice here down on rule number 5, we actually have an exclamation point. And what Qradar is showing us here is if we actually hover over that and drill into it, it's detecting that this rule is probably inefficient or totally inefficient. And again, putting your mouse over on top of it and clicking on it will give us the pop-up of what Qradar Risk Manager has determined about this particular event. And if you notice, it's telling us that this particular event is a shadow rule and it's being overridden by entry number 4. So again, if you have a complex environment, a lot of firewalls, a lot of firewall rules, this is an easy way to detect and find entries in your rules that really aren't doing anything, right? Should probably take a look at, get cleaned up. So again, Qradar does not change configurations of your firewalls, but it helps you understand how they're working. And again, any rule that you can remove from your firewalls just makes them quicker. Because remember, it has to process for every packet, every rule, whether the rule is good or not. So it's very interesting. And of course, if we look at it, we can see, we have a deny at rule 4, then we had an accept at rule 5 for a particular subnet. We can see why it was lost. Another interesting point is over here, this event count. If we notice in my lab, it's all zeroed. But what this is showing us in a production environment is how much often this rule gets fired, right? So it sees the traffic coming through, it understands the rules in place, and it keeps an accurate count of how useful this firewall rule is. So then that can generate reports later. Again, that happens if the syslog is pointed over to this machine. Another thing to look at here is the history. So if we click up on this particular button up at the top, we can hit history. And if we notice on this particular firewall, we have 2 different configuration states. So Qradar does check the configuration. If it compares it to one that's already saved and there's no changes, he doesn't update it. But if he does notice that there's a change, he'll actually save a new configuration state. So again, the nice part about this is that we can go say, well, what had changed between these two configuration states in this point of time? Kind of like a check and balances, right? So we're validating what has been changed on these things. So it's very simple to do, is if, again, we select both of these changes, and if there's multiple of them, you can compare it over time. But if you select both of these and then come over here and say compare selected and click this button, he will generate a very human readable, because it's normalized events of what's been changed, what was added, and what was removed. Again, very powerful when you're auditing your systems, totally understanding what changes were put in place and when, and you can validate that, maybe you had this open service ticket for these changes to be put in place. So again, understand that, and it become important in a second as I compare two different firewalls, but this is normalized data. So Qradar does keep the raw configuration. You can obviously just come in here and click it, and he'll show you what it looks like from the firewall rule and the vendor language itself. So I still have that raw information, but that normalized view is just, let me click that again, is a much easier way to view this, right? It just kind of jumps out at you and it is color-coded. So that in itself is great, but let's say that you're swapping firewalls around and you want to compare one to another firewall at another location. Well, what we can do is click this rule. We can mark it for compare. So it's going to put a little flag next to it. So now it's marking this for compare. We're going to go back to our device view. Let me click that again. Go back to our device view where we're going to list all the other devices that we have in our environment. And we'll just select one of these guys down here and drill into him. Same way, just kind of double click on him. And then what we can do again up under history is click this. We're going to see his different settings. And then this time we're going to say compare with marked. And what we're going to notice here is there's massive changes between these two firewalls. So in this example, they're probably, firewall in the DMZ and maybe firewall in the data center. But again, the capability of comparing firewalls across vendors is pretty amazing within the Qradar environment.